Thank you so much for coming. I was just waiting for the sound to come up. Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here. Thank you all for coming out. Or, well, not for coming out. Like, that way I wouldn't know. Thank you for coming here. I know that you're wondering why you're here. I've been appropriately vague with the advertising campaign for this thing. And I deliberately had everybody sitting very far away from the exit so that you couldn't kind of conveniently sneak out if you're kind of wondering if this was being really weird or not. But I really appreciate you coming out here. What I'm going to talk about is something that is simply the single greatest thing that, in my opinion, that I have learned in life. And you can take it home and think about it, and hopefully you can use it. So, imagine this is a theater. It's 5 times bigger than this place. It's empty. It's 9:30 in the morning. There's 9 hours to opening night. And I'm sitting up there, way up in the back, where the sound engineers and the lighting designer have their desk with the faders and the turny things and the knobs and the buttons and what have you. I'm sitting up there. I'm called in for an extra rehearsal. And I'm just sitting there waiting for the director to arrive. But for some reason, I'm scared. I'm trembling. I'm shaking. And I feel tears coming up inside my eyes, and I don't know why. Because I don't get stage fright. It's not in me. I love being on stage, and I'm good at being on stage. So I don't know what's going on. Suddenly the director comes in, and he says, "All right, let's get to work. Let's get you down here on the stage." And tears just burst out of me. And I feel my whole system just shutting down. I feel paralyzed, like I'm just physically unable to get up and walk down through the auditorium and get up on the stage and do the rehearsal that I'm supposed to do. And I'm just sitting there and I don't know what's going on. So, what's going on is I'm having a nervous breakdown. And let me go back a week. A week before that day, we moved into the theater. I was 25 years old. This was my first professional production as a musical theater performer ever. And my first professional job that I ever got paid for happened to be the leading role in the musical Cabaret. And this was it. We'd been rehearsing for 5 weeks. And a week before, we moved into the theater. We got on the big stage. Suddenly, the whole orchestra was in the pit. We started doing tech rehearsals. We started doing run-throughs of the actual complete show. And the first night we did the run-through with orchestra and everything, I hadn't really seen that much of the director for the first 5 weeks. Because Cabaret is divided kind of into 2 parts. There's all the musical theater numbers, the singing and dancing, and that takes place in this place called the Kit Kat Club. And that's where my character is the MC, the conférencier. And then there's the actual story that goes on beside it. So the director and the choreographer, they had divided the process into that all of the speaking things, all the actual story, the director would handle that. But everything that went on in the Kit Kat Club, the choreographer would do that. Not only choreograph it, but also stage it and direct it. So I had been working only with the choreographer for 5 weeks, building my character and getting to the point where we were ready to take this on stage. And so we did the first run-through, and after the first run-through, we sat down and we got notes from the director. He was not happy with what I was doing. Basically, he thought everything that I did was wrong. He basically wanted me to do my whole character differently. And so he said, well, can you do this and can you change that, and you have to be more like this and less like that, and you have to do more of this and you have to do less of that, and yada, yada, yada. Okay, so I went home and I thought about that, and I came back the next day for the next run-through. Same thing. Bad critique. I just got hammered. Say, it's not what I want, it's not the MC that I envisioned, you have to be, it's too much of this, it's too little of that. Okay. Third night, I was doing my best. I got up there every night with the full orchestra, with the full cast. I was powering on, same thing. Just unhappy director. And I did that for 5 or 6 days until the dress rehearsal, the evening before opening night. And afterwards, it was the same thing. And then the director said, Martin, can you come in tomorrow morning at 9:30 or 10 o'clock? Before opening night in the evening, I want to go through all of your solo stuff with 9 hours to opening night. And I was, at that point, I was confused and I was bewildered and I was frustrated because I didn't understand what he was after. I didn't understand what it really was that he wanted, because he kind of just kept saying that what I did was not what he wanted. But he didn't really tell me what he did wanted. I was just not it. So by that time, I was like, I don't know what to give you. I don't know what you want. So, and this was 5 hours out of Copenhagen, and I was put up in a little apartment for this production, and it was 20 minutes from the theater. And I remember that walk in the morning from the apartment down to the theater, just feeling completely lost and like I'm not going to be able to do anything because I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I don't know what he wants. And I just felt paralyzed. So when I got there, I was just sitting there until when he finally arrived and walked in, I broke. And I just started crying. And I kept crying for about 20 minutes until the director finally just gave up. And he said, well, all right, we're not going to get anything done. Go home and rest, and I'll see you tonight, and try to do, what I said last night. And I don't know what that is. So the choreographer was there as well. When we walked out together, the director had already left. The choreographer said, Martin, I don't know. I don't know what he wants. I'm as confused as you are. I don't know. The only thing that I have seen through this last week is that when you shine, you really shine, but you're inconsistent. Sometimes you're just not fully there. That's the only thing I've noticed that I can give you as something tangible. And we went our ways, and I walked that 20 minutes back to my apartment. I had a roommate that was in the show as well. I snuck in because I was still kind of bawl crying, and I didn't want to upset her and distract her because she was going to do a show in the evening as well. So I didn't want to take it out on her. So as soon as I came into my room, I kind of just felt I have to get out. I can't just sit here and wait for evening and opening night to come. So I snuck back out and I went down to the beach. The apartment was right by the sea, and I took a long walk by the beach. And before you start getting any nice images in your head about taking a long walk at the beach, this was not a nice walk because, yes, granted, there are nice beaches in Copenhagen. This was not one of them. It was one of the stony, messy, annoying ones that are it messes up your feet to walk for more than 30 minutes, stones all over. And it was in January, so it was freaking cold. So, but I just walked, and I cried, and I walked, and I cried, and I walked, and I cried for 3 hours. And then I finally stopped crying. And at that time, I realized okay, this state that I'm in now is useless. It's useless to me, but it certainly also will be useless to my fellow cast, and it will be useless to the audience. Because this state I'm in is not interesting to anybody. I can't be like this in front of an audience. That's not going to be good entertainment. You know, I just a mess. So this is not going to be good showmanship. So I made up my mind, and I said, I don't know what that guy wants. I don't know how to give it to him. So the only thing that I do know is I have to be comfortable when I get down there. I have to be comfortable when I get on stage. Otherwise, I cannot provide anything that's interesting if I don't feel good about what I do. So I have to go down there and I have to enjoy myself. And that's what I did. So I got my things at home and I took the walk back down there for the third time that day, and I got into the theater really early, maybe 2.5 hours, 3 hours before curtain went up. When I walked in, the only one that was there was the woman that was playing Sally Bowles, the leading role. Now, she was really experienced, this woman that played that part. She just came off this hugely successful TV hit series thing, Danish smash hit. So everyone knew who she was, and she had done this a ton of times. It was my first time. She was the only one in her dressing room, so obviously when I walked by and I saw that she was there, I kind of had to stick my head in there. It would be, you know, weird not to. So I just opened the door, and I didn't say anything. She just immediately said, Martin, what's going on? What's wrong? Because it was maybe an hour ago that I had stopped crying after having cried for maybe 5 hours straight. So it showed on my face, even though I was fine at that time, but obviously it showed. I hadn't put any makeup on yet, and women, you know, change that can do. So she just asked me, what's going on? What's wrong? And I said, let's just say I had a rough morning, but I'm okay. I'm fine. I'll be fine. And she gave me a great hug, and she said, Martin, you're great. You're really great. And I went into my dressing room, who I was actually sharing with 3 of the other guys in the cast, the guy that plays Cliff, the old guy that plays the old Jew, and one other guy. And I had this, my dressing room was a circus when I did this show, because I had like 10 different costumes. I had hair and makeup and shoes and stuff like that. I actually had hair back then. You're not going to believe it. I had extensions back then. Very charming, kind of black Hitler side looks kind of thing, very sexy. So it took me like at least an hour and a half to get ready for the show. So I got ready, showtime came, I went back up to the stage, I was standing in the wings, waiting to go on stage, could hear all audience coming in, buzzing from the wings, people trying to find their seats, yada, 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 talking, and then suddenly the crowd went silent and the light came down in the auditorium. You couldn't really see it, but you could feel it, because there was something about the warmth on stage changed when that happened. And I had this funny little intro. I was supposed to walk in the dark, dressed as cleaning personnel, with this janitor's coat over my MC costume, and with a broom. So I just start walking in on stage, sweeping the floor in the dark. And then suddenly the drum roll comes up. And then the music kicks in the dark. Ding, dee, dee, ding, dee, dee, ding, dee, 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 ding. And then the lights comes up and I start stripping this janitor coat off, and I go into my song. And we did the first act, off we went, and it went well. Or I don't really know, I don't remember. I was in a haze, just trying to enjoy myself. I came back in my dressing room in the intermission. The choreographer, who was an American, this tall American choreographer, just pops his head in and he says, Martin, I don't know what you're doing, but you're fantastic. Keep it up. I kept on with my show, got ready for second act. We did yada, yada, yada. And it went well. It went really well. The next day, the reviews came in, and they were good. They were really good. My reviews were really good. It was like, Cabaret is a well-crafted, thoroughly entertaining show, but the shining star of the show is the double-faced, sleazy MC played by Martin Svaneborg. And I'm not paraphrasing, those were the words. Did the director say anything to me after the show? Nothing. Silence. Not a single comment about that whole week of just whoosh. So it went well. And after that, I started to think, why did that happen? How could he get me down to such an extent that I actually had a nervous breakdown? How could he break me in that kind of way? Because he wasn't really actually being that mean about it. He was quite civilized in how he gave his critiques. It's not like he was yelling and screaming. He just said, well, I'm not happy with this and this, and now I don't like it, and yada, yada, yada. And the reason why is because, and here comes the clue to the title of the show, I took it personal. And I got offended because I had been spending 5 weeks of rehearsing 6 hours a day for the show. I'd been working with a very competent American choreographer, building up this character that I was very proud of and that he was very happy with. And then when we finally got to the run-throughs, it was like the director just dismissed the 5 weeks of work that I had put into this. Nothing of it mattered. Nothing of it had any value. And I couldn't understand, how could he not trust me? How could he not trust the work that I had done for 5 weeks and at least just acknowledge some of it? I took that very personal because I was up there every night being very personal about what I did. Now, the problem with that, the problem with getting offended and the problem with taking things personal is that it's extremely time-consuming and it's very energy-consuming. Have you ever thought about that? How many of you have gotten caught off in traffic? Everyone, right? Everyone. How many of you have, after that, spent a significant amount of time having a dialogue with what you wanted to say to that idiot that cut you off? Right? And you get surprised at how much time afterwards you can spend on keep talking to that person. Yeah? How many of you have actually done it out loud? Don't lie. I have hundreds of times, like hours afterwards, I suddenly catch myself walking down the street, talking out loud to this person that I'm being angry at for cutting me off in traffic, right? And suddenly you get like, wait, why am I having a conversation with this guy or this woman that I don't know? I mean, why am I so angry with this person that I haven't even met? They just cut me off. I don't even know them. So where does all this reaction comes from? You know, why do I waste so much of my energy being angry at someone who doesn't even know that I'm angry with them? Because they just went off they drove off and never really kind of noticed that I was sitting there going, oh my God, how could you? Yeah. And they don't know. So all of this energy that I spend on being angry about it, the only one that loses out on the whole situation is me. Because I just spend 3 hours being really distracted and not really being able to think about anything else while being angry at that person. So I started thinking about that kind of stuff. And something made me wonder, because during that week leading up to opening night, there was this one evening, I think it was the second or the third run-through, and we always had notes together on stage with the director, whole cast after, and then he just said everything that he had to say to everyone that was sitting down. Then I would, with the dance girls, who were called the Kit Kat girls, go outside and have dance notes with the choreographer. All notes that just had relation to the choreography and to the dance steps. So one evening, first or second run through, it must have been, we were sitting out there afterwards with the choreographer, and he was pissed. He was just not happy. And it was not with people doing anything the wrong way or yada, yada, yada. It was just all the poor girls being sloppy and simply not good enough. So he started, and imagine 2-meter tall, American, very gay, very angry choreographer that just started screaming at these 8 generally 20-year-old girls that were sitting there and just being, you don't know what you're doing and you need to shape up, and if you don't shape up and do better tomorrow, I can have all of you replaced. Don't you think for a minute that any one of you is not replaceable? And he was just yelling at them and just throwing vile and bitterness at them for 15 minutes. And I was sitting there in the minute, because he was actually not talking to me. I was just sitting there, they were sitting there, he was standing there. And I was just watching this vile, angry energy just hurling past me at these women, getting really, really scared. And the odd thing that I noticed a week later was that didn't bother me. It bothered me on their behalf. But him yelling and screaming didn't bother me personally. That did not offend me. And so suddenly after that whole breakdown thing, I was wondering, the director, who could be quite civil about it, how could he break me down? And then that guy that was actually being extremely mean and nasty about it, that didn't bother me. How could that be? And the reason for that, I didn't know at the time. I noticed it, or I figured it out many years later. Had to do with something that happened 10 years, not 10 years earlier, many years earlier when I was 10 years old. There was one night when I was 10 years old. I was out riding my bike. And the reason that I was out riding my bike, it was about 11 o'clock in the evening. I was 10 years old. So obviously as 10 years old, I shouldn't be out just riding my bike around at 11 o'clock in the evening. The reason why I was out riding my bike is because I was looking for my father. I am a single child, and I was living with a single parent. Only child, single parent, that's what it's called. And I was out looking for him because he was out drinking. He was an alcoholic. So sometimes he just didn't come home in the evening, and then I was home alone. So I just got into this routine. When it got to a certain point in the evening and he hadn't come home, I would just get my bike and I would start riding around. There was this little village, like an hour and a half outside of Copenhagen where we grew up. And I knew his hangout spots. So I would just bicycle around and check them one after another. Try to just find him and say, all right, it's time to come home and make me some dinner. Or whatever. So I was driving down this long hill in the middle of the village. And down at the end of that hill, there was a little bridge going over a stream, and then you can go up on the other side, and then the actual village was there, which was like 4 stores and a video rental thing, which they had back then. Anyone remember the movie box? I just realized that like 2 days ago. It's like, oh my God, the movie box. Anyway, and then you could go up behind and the train station was up there. So from the top of the hill, you could see all the way down there to the river and to the bridge. I could see way down there in front of the bridge, someone was lying on the bicycle pathway, and there was a moped lying next to that person. I knew my father was out on his moped. When I got closer, I was just free rolling my bike down, and I rolled fast. When I got closer, I could see that moped was the same kind as my father's. When I got down there, I could see there was blood on the ground. And when I got really close, I could see that there was not just blood on the ground, there was a whole pool of blood on the ground. And my father's head was in the middle of that pool of blood. And it was not just my father lying there, it was my dead father that was lying there. And the strange thing is, in that moment, standing there, watching my dead father lying there in that pool of blood, the moped was thrown out in a ditch or something like that. I don't remember anything about what I did in that actual moment. I don't remember if I cried out his name or if I poked him or, to test if he was actually dead or not. I don't remember anything at all other than just the image of him lying there. What I do remember is riding my bike back up the hill, having left him behind down there in the pool, saying to myself and asking to myself on the way back up the hill, riding back home to figure out what am I going to do, asking myself at the age of 10, I live alone now. How does one do that? Like, okay, now I have to go shopping on my own, and how do I tell my teachers tomorrow morning that I'm living alone now? Do I get to actually stay there, or will I have to move out of the house? And kind of, how does that work now that I'm living alone? And what do I do with Dad who's lying down? I mean, he can't just stay lying down there. I have to do something about it. So when I got home, I thought, my grandfather was a retired doctor. So I was like, I'll call Granddad and I'll ask him, he'll know what to do. Like if I should call the police or an ambulance or, practical, what to do. So, and obviously I was crying because I was really scared. Because the thought of living alone was oddly not that fun of a thought at the age of 10. So I called my granddad crying, and I asked him and I explained him to the situation, and I said, what should I do? Dad is down there, I think he's dead, and yada, yada, yada. And he said, you go and call the neighbor, go next door to the neighbor, knock on the door, and tell them to come down there with you, and they'll get a taxi or call the police or whatever, they're grown-ups. They'll know what to do. Just go knock on the door and get them to come and help you. And I was like, but it's like 11:30 in the evening. Like, isn't that rude to go and knock on the door now? It's really late. And he was like, no, Martin, it's okay. You can do that. And okay, so I did that. And the neighbor's girlfriend opened the door, and obviously it was okay. So she walked down with me. When we got down there, he was not lying in the same position. He was lying in a slightly different position. So he was actually not dead. He was just passed out and really drunk. So she called a taxi that came and then took him home, and then I walked back home with the neighbor's girlfriend. The next day, my father never said anything about that. The trademark of alcoholics is denial and just pretend nothing happened. So he never said anything the next day, even though he had a huge sore on his whole half face. So obviously he knew something had happened the day before, because his face must have been hurting like hell. But obviously he was embarrassed because he didn't remember what had happened, and he didn't remember how he came home. What he probably noticed quite quickly is that his moped was not at home, because it was still lying in the ditch down there. So he didn't remember how he got home without the moped. So he didn't say anything and never mentioned it. But I spent the entire rest of that day just having that image in my head of my dead father lying in a pool of blood. So when I was sitting there at Cabaret watching the choreographer yell at the girls, and he was just being rah, And it didn't bother me. I noticed many years later that it was just because I had had much worse. I had experienced something that was way worse than someone just yelling. So there are certain things that I was kind of like immune to. And I early on noticed that that was actually a bit of an advantage. Now, there's a Netflix special. I know it's a good segue from my dead father to Netflix special. There's a Netflix special with a, by now, quite famous woman. You might know her. She's called Brené Brown. And she has a talk on Netflix that's called The Call to Courage. If you haven't seen it, go home and see it. It's really good. And she talks about vulnerability and shame. She's a PhD social researcher that has specialized in the two areas, vulnerability and shame, as human behavior. She describes vulnerability as when you put yourself in a position where you cannot control the emotional outcome. That's vulnerability. Which more or less this is, getting up here, right? Because I can't control how you're going to react to it. I can't control the outcome of this. So vulnerability is every time you put yourself knowingly in a position that you cannot control the outcome of. That's vulnerability. I've always been very comfortable with vulnerability. I can cry at chick flicks like the best of them. And when I go on stage, I've always been very comfortable with this. I've always been comfortable with having to show emotions and stuff like that. Because, I don't know, it's because of my father or it's because of whatever, but I've just always been very comfortable with it. But where it changed with why did I have that breakdown at Cabaret is because vulnerability is when you get up on stage and you can't control the outcome, but if you do well, the outcome will likely be good. If you know that you're well prepared, if you know that you're good at it. So when I went on stage with the MC, and there was 1,000 people in the auditorium, I knew there would always be someone who hated me. I knew there would be someone that didn't like what I did. But I knew if I did well, if I was prepared, and if I really rocked it, then the people that did like what I do would usually be the majority. And I could win a lot of people over by just doing well. So then vulnerability is not that intimidating. It's not that scary if you know that you have a chance to turn it to your advantage. The problem was that guy, the director, when you, for the entire week of the run-throughs, my entire audience was just him, was just that one person. And when you know that you have to go on stage and do it over and over again, and you know you can't do anything to change it, you know that whatever you do, you will be slayed, you will fail. That's not vulnerability, that's terror. That's mental abuse when you know you have to get up there to get failed. That doesn't make you stronger, which vulnerability will. That will break you. And that's what happened to me. So, the interesting thing about this is, for years, I was telling myself the story of this director had treated me really badly. My father had been a really bad father and treated me really badly and stuff like that. Until one day, I realized that I was leading the life that I had described for myself. The story that you tell yourself is the life that you live. And I was telling myself these negative stories about that I had been treated badly, so I had something holding me back. but I was able to start changing those stories around. And when that really started to change was primarily that cabaret story changed drastically for me. And it started to change about 5 years after cabaret. LinkedIn had arrived. You remember? That was when that was the new thing that everybody had to be on. And I have actually been absolutely terrible at keeping up with LinkedIn ever since, because I've not had that kind of an entrepreneurship where I really needed LinkedIn. But I was there and I'd set up a profile and yada, yada, yada. So I don't know, maybe if you know how it works today, you can tell me if it's still like that. But back then, you kind of file in your CV and how it worked and what you were good at and stuff like that. And then other people could like recommend you for skills you were good at. Is it still like that? Yeah? So, someone knows. So, I had done that, and then suddenly I started getting these notifications from LinkedIn that I had recommendations. And all these recommendations was from that director from Cabaret. And I was like, what? What? Like, what? Like, I recommend Martin for, he's good at directing, he's good at acting, he's good at singing, and he's good at this, and he's good at like 5 or 6 or 7 of them. And I was like, what is going on? Like, you hated me. Why? What's up with this? And then I went in and I read his bio. And then suddenly a light went off, and I noticed something that I should have known about him that I didn't know. One thing I should have been able to figure out, and that was he was half German. And I should have figured that out because he had a bit of an accent. The other one was that he was Jewish. Half German, Jewish. We were doing Cabaret, which is about the rise of Nazi Germany and Holocaust in pre-World War II Berlin. And he was half German and Jewish. I was a 25-year-old white guy doing his first role ever. And I was supposed to live up to his vision of how he wanted to tell the story of his people, of his culture. And I don't know if you know about 25-year-old men. They only really have one ambition at the age of 25, and that is to show off. 25-year-old guys, they want to impress, and that's about it. And they want to impress with one objective and one objective only, and that is to get laid. And that's it. So that's where I was. I was 25-year-old, and I was just in there, and I'm embarrassed to admit it, but that was the truth. I just wanted to impress. I just wanted to get on stage and just be cool and strut my stuff and do all the things that looked, impressive and cool and kind of macho, so that I could impress the girls and maybe get laid that evening. And does that really combine well with a half German Jewish director who's doing Cabaret? No, of course not. So obviously I was the wrong guy for the job at that time. He just hadn't noticed it until a week before opening night. Because at the audition, I had apparently done well enough to persuade him that I could do this. And then suddenly he realized, oh my God, he can't. He's too young, he's too immature, he's like what is. Yeah? And it made me suddenly see that whole story in a different light. There's a very well-known international speaker, I think he's Canadian or something like that. He's called Eric Edmeades. You can find him on YouTube. And he invented this concept called the hindsight window, which basically is about the stories that you have lived, all the things that you have in your past. How do you look at those stories that you have as a part of your past and as a part of your baggage? Those stories, you can change how you relate to them in terms of which window you look at them through. And if you look at them through a window of me, oh, I've been so badly treated, and he was being so disrespectful, and he was yada, yada, yada. But after I realized that, then suddenly I was seeing that experience through a different window, because I could suddenly see where he was coming from. I could suddenly see, of course, he was unhappy. And of course, he didn't know how to say it. Right? The fact that he didn't give me any proper feedback, any tangible advice on what to change, because he couldn't. Because the problem was, I was just the wrong guy. I was just being 25. Yeah? He wanted someone else. So my stories started to change. And when that happens, the beauty of it is that then you can suddenly start to listen to what people think and what people say to you. And you can actually start to learn. You can actually start to grow as a person. And you can actually start to connect. When you can get your own surface reaction out of the way and just say, there's probably something behind this of why this could be viewed for me as a bad experience. Just like when I get angry at that whoever cuts me off, and I can spend 3 hours yelling to myself when I walk down the street. It doesn't help to really say him, tell the person, why did you cut me off? What helps is to ask myself, why do I have a need to spend 3 hours being upset about it? And where does that need in me come from? And when I can figure out that where my need comes from, then I can choose to react on it, or I can choose to not. And if I can choose to not react, then suddenly I can hear what's being said to me. And then everything becomes, regardless of whether it's that choreographer who's being really mean and being really nasty, and someone should tell him, you need to shut up and just take it down a notch, because that's not okay. Yeah? But I don't have to not listen to what's being said because of that. Does that make sense? So, here's the kicker. The real kicker. About 4 or 5 years ago, so it's more than 10 years after Cabaret. 4 or 5 years ago, I am invited to a 60-year birthday out of town. Very famous vocal coach. I didn't really know her that well. I just kind of went there to network because I knew a lot of my colleagues and people from the business would be there. So I just went there. And then the director is there. And I haven't met him since Cabaret. He was there for Cabaret. I think we played 30 or 40 performances of Cabaret, a month and a half or something like that. He saw every single performance. He stayed there. But since the last performance, I had never seen him until I met him 4 or 5 years ago at that party. And then obviously we started, mingling, small talking over the buffet or whatever. And at that time, there was actually another professional production of Cabaret up. And it was the first professional production that had been up since our production. The guy that played MC in that production was very famous, very experienced, much older, more experienced, more famous than I was when I did Cabaret. So obviously, I had to ask the director, have you seen the new Cabaret? Yes, I've seen the new Cabaret. All right, what did you think of the new MC? And then he said this. He said, Martin, I don't think you know this, but before we did our Cabaret, I had already directed 2 other productions of Cabaret before that with 2 other MCs. And I have to tell you, I've never seen a better MC before or after you. And I was like, and I was really thinking, what the, could you not have told me sooner? like maybe told me back when I kind of needed it. I was a mess for quite a while after that. That would really have made my days, a long time ago. Why don't you tell, why now? I don't care anymore. But gee, thanks for the compliment. And so, here's the thing. Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It's the courage to continue that counts. Immortal words by Winston Churchill. To every one of us, life is personal. Your life is personal to you. My life is personal to me. And it has to be that way. Because if I don't allow myself to be personal about my own life and about me, it's not going to be very interesting being me and living my life. And frankly, you're not going to find me interesting either if you don't allow me to be personal about myself. Right? So if in the heat of the moment I say something to you that hurt you, you have a choice. If I'm being a dick about how I say it and it's required for you to take a stand, take the stand. Don't get me wrong. But whatever you do, don't get in your own way. Don't throw away the opportunity to listen. Don't throw away the opportunity to learn and grow because you opt to be personal and to be offended and get upset. Don't take it personal because it's probably just me being personal. So let me finally put this to you. Let me live my life personally, and you live your life personally. And that way you can live your life without having to live everybody else's as well. And I think you deserve that. Thank you. That's all I had to say. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming.